You got to operate in truth, right? Operate in truth. Tell the truth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gator Truth Florida Football Podcast. I'm Daniel, and on this episode, we're going to take a look at the Gators' 45-35 loss against LSU, and I'm going to tell you what I think about the current state of our defense. To begin, I want to look at the offense. We're going to begin looking at Anthony Richardson's day. He ended up being 15 of 25 for 185 yards passing, including the brilliant 51-yard touchdown pass to begin the scoring in the game. He also had 109 yards rushing in the game. Going into the final drive of the game, which of course was with less than 2 minutes left, we're trying to score and hopefully get an onside kick, which of course ended up not happening. Going into that, he was actually throwing for 70%. He ended up at 60%, and he was 14 of 20, and that included a few good throwaways. So I really don't think it was too bad of a passing game. Yes, he did throw a bad ball that should have been a touchdown to Xanders. That wasn't good, but he also had some other good plays in there as well. I would give AR's performance a B+. On that last drive where he ended up being 1 for 5, a lot of that was some issues with the offensive line, allowing guys to get through quickly. We saw that not just on his incompletions, but also on what was labeled a fumble or a rush by Montrell Johnson because it was a backwards lateral. That play, I'm still confused on why it was blown dead, considering an incompletion, and then the ball spotted 5 yards back. Montrell Johnson, if that's a lateral, as they call it, should have had the ability to take that ball and run forward. But with that said, not too big of a deal. We weren't going to really come back at that point as a matter of probability. One thing that AR did that a lot of people have been looking for him to do in this game is that he hit his checkdowns a few times. There's times where that worked out for him, a few times where it did not, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit later as we go on to some specific performances. I again got to hear some great commentary on the stands. One example was hearing people yell, "Throw the ball," when we only had 3 guys running routes and 7 guys were in coverage and actually doing good coverage. We had the deep guy in triple coverage, we had a medium guy in double coverage, and we had another guy in double coverage. And meanwhile, you're blaming the quarterback for not throwing the ball in double or triple coverage. I just found that hilarious. And then there's another time, I believe Pearsall got hit for about a 10, 11 yard gain where you're hearing, "Run, you idiot." And then he, of course, throws for a first down. So maybe chill out a little bit and watch the whole thing and what's going on. As I joked about on Twitter, sometimes you'll have people seeing a called design rollout to the right and a guy on the left sideline 50 yards down the field, which get out your Pythagorean theorem, and you're going to see that's like a 70, 80 yard pass and think that's a reasonable pass. That's not to say there aren't passes that aren't there. They can't do better. Again, going back to that Xanders touchdown pass that he should have had. On the other side of the coin, there are times that people think he's not doing something right when he definitely is. Moving on, I'm going to give the running backs a B-. They were not much help to the offense overall. Now our offense did score 35 points, so that is a good thing, and I can't bash that too much. Montrell Johnson did have a great 39-yard touchdown. That lateral play was considered a rush loss of 5. But outside of, if we subtract that from his rushing total, outside of the 39-yard TD, he had 11 carries for 23 yards. That's 2.09 yards per carry. That is abysmal. Trevor Etienne had 3.5 yards per carry. Again, not good. Lorenzo Lingard, got to see some of him. He did look decent, averaged 5.3 yards a carry. I do believe that he was under 4 yards per carry outside of his high of 9 yards. With that said, these guys do need to do a little bit better. Johnson did get a ball thrown to him on a check down. He danced a little bit instead of going north-south. If he goes north-south, I think he gets more than the 1 yard he did. Or if he just picks a side on either side of the guy playing him, maybe he breaks the tackle because the guy takes a bad angle. Instead, he dances around, and by then, he's gotten locked down by this guy for only a 1 yard gain. It's hard for me to really say much about the performance of the wide receivers and tight ends. At times, they did great things. Like there's, of course, a great Justin Shorter catch on that touchdown. It was right in front of me in the south end zone. And then there was some great plays by Pearsall in the game, had a nice catch and run. And there are a few other things going on. I would say overall, this was a pretty average game, and I like to keep a B being about my average score, maybe a little bit lower average score, but with the nice things going on with that touchdown catch, I'll give them a B. Moving to the offensive line, I am going to give them a C. I know that Osiris Torrance ended up not playing, and then I didn't see too much of Michael Tarquin, though it was good to see him suited up again. He's been out for several weeks. Austin Barber has done decent in his stead, but there are times that he gets beat when I think maybe Tarquin would not. I give it a C in large part to our running averages throughout the game. Yes, they did some good things, but we also had times where AR was getting tons of pressure. And a little bit of a microcosm of that was on the last drive of the game where we get the first down, and then Ethan White, he has a false start. Then we have 2 holding penalties. Both were declined, but also during that segment, there was tons of pressure on AR as well, limiting his ability to help lead us down the field. Again, chances of us winning at that point very slim, but definitely going to take a hit when your quarterback has tons of pressure on him throughout that series. Moving on to what we're going to spend a decent amount of time on, which is the defense. The thing you need to know about LSU's 45 points is that they scored on 7 of their 8 full drives, and on the 8th drive, they had an open receiver on the 3rd down on the slant, and for some reason, the quarterback threw it just behind, and the receiver could not pull it in and drop it. It was not through us getting tons of pressure. It was not from us playing tight coverage. It was simply just a bad play on LSU's part, and we can't be relying on the other team to mess up. Now, we did have a few times where we had LSU stopped on 3rd down. Unfortunately, those times we allowed them to get into a 4th and 1, 4th and 2 type situation, and they converted 2 of 2 4th down attempts on us to keep their drives going. One of which was actually quite dangerous for them, where had we stopped them, it'd be a 1-score game, and then we could march down the ball to tie it. And we did not step up at that point at all. So let's start looking at the different units. The defensive line, as you know, I include the quote-unquote outside linebacker position with Brenton Cox and others behind him as part of the defensive line, as usually they're part of the pass rush. Not always, but usually. For this position group, I'm going to give them a D. The position group only had 1 sack and 1.5 tackles for loss. And this is against an LSU line that had been shaky all year. And as we said in the preview, LSU's writers were talking about this being the 6th different lineup for the offensive line in 7 games. This was not a dominant LSU O-line that we're going against. So the fact that they only got 1 sack and only got 1.5 tackles for loss for those on the line is not good. Further, we saw times where they were blowing the edges, including a touchdown run where if Brenton Cox just holds that edge, he's got Daniels dead to right. Instead, he doesn't hold the edge, and Daniels gets a touchdown run right there in the south end zone. There were also plenty of times where this group failed to get any pressure. And when you fail to get pressure throughout most of the game, that's going to put extra problems on your already struggling defensive backfield. As we've talked about numerous times now, the defensive line and the defensive backfield are a symbiotic relationship. The more pressure that they get on a quarterback, the easier it is on the defensive backs. And then also, the better the defensive backs play, the tighter the coverage, it can help out the defensive line. In this game, neither group did really much of anything to help the other, and that is why the defensive line / outside linebacker position is going to be considered a D in my regards. The linebacker position, Ventrell Miller, Amari Burney, they did all right. I mean, Miller did well with 10 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. However, there are times he is a liability in coverage. I can think of at least one play where they went after Ventrell Miller in particular and got a big passing play for it. Amari Burney, same type of deal. He did have 8 tackles. Not much to say about Shamar James. He had a tackle or 2. So in this game, not that great of performance for these guys. Ventrell Miller also on a Jaden Daniels touchdown run. Dives a little bit early. He could probably continue taking a step or 2 and maybe get Daniels towards that sideline. Or maybe make the tackle and say dives a little bit early and doesn't get the tackle. Daniels goes in for the score. This week, I'm just going to grade the secondary as a whole. The cornerbacks, the nickelback or star, or whatever we're calling it this week, and the safeties, and I'm grading them all as an F. We gave up about a 75% completion percentage, and we played tons of off man, sometimes way far off. There's one photo that went around Twitter, which is actually from a play. I said to my brother, I said, look at this. They're about to convert. They're going to throw to number 87. And sure enough, that's what they did. The nearest defensive back on him, I believe, was 15, 20 yards off the ball at snap. So that's a really quick, really easy throw for a first down. And we saw lots of stuff like that during the night. There weren't many times where our guys were looking for the ball. They poor tackled. Currently, Gator Nation Football Podcast on their Twitter page has posted a specific, I think it might be the first third down we gave up, where Boutte from LSU catches the ball like 20 yards downfield on a 3rd and 8 after another miscue by our senior safety who continues to start, and another miscue. And then he and our lovely nickelback collide with each other, don't make the tackle, so the other safety has to come running and luckily makes the touchdown saving tackle. And things like that again happen throughout the night. Poor tackling, not looking for the ball. There's at least one time where if we looked for the ball, it's a pick, and we didn't. I'm not going to talk about that Jervon Dexter Sr. roughing the passer play because it shouldn't come down to one blown call to ruin the game for us. And when you let the other team score on 7 out of 8 drives, you deserve to lose. I mean, that's just it. And this was not a great LSU offense. That's one thing that has to be repeated. This was a generally pedestrian LSU offense, not the greatest, not the worst, and we're making them look like Tennessee's offense, and that's not good. We probably played Tennessee's offense a little bit better than this, and I'm not just talking about what the score ended up being. I'm talking about some of the pressure, some of the windows. It seems like this defense has regressed since the beginning of the season. With that said, I want to go ahead and get into what is probably the biggest talking point going into this bye week, and that, of course, is the defense. We talked in the preseason about this defense is pretty much the same defense that we had last year as far as personnel. We did lose a guy like Zach Carter. We talked about things that were good and bad, where he got some of his numbers, where he didn't. Definitely a guy you would miss, though. Kyrie Elam, we talked about how not Amari Burney, I apologize, how Jason Marshall would be stepping up in his place. We talked about how Jason Marshall last year led the SEC as a true freshman, led the SEC in completion percentage against, and also in quarterback rating on throws of 20 or more yards. And last year, as a true freshman, leading the SEC in that completion percentage against, is phenomenal considering the other side was the guy no one wanted to throw at. So who are they throwing at more? Jason Marshall. And again, we talked about how Kyrie Elam missed multiple games. I bring that up again to tell you this was a generally experienced defense. We can talk about linebacker where Ventrell Miller is an upgrade from Mahmoud Diabate. There's no question about that. Jeremiah Moon, Mari Burney, a little bit of a wash. Same safeties, same nickelback. D-line, we're concerned about defensive tackles. However, I would think that Desmond Watson, Jalen Lee, Chris McClellan, guys like that have come in and done about the same, roughly, as the defensive tackles last year, who were solid but not spectacular. Our defensive tackles overall this year have been solid, not spectacular. I retread what our defense looked like in the offseason and the comparison with last year's defense because 7 games through the season and going to the bye week. Let's take a look. There are some people out there, and maybe it's you and maybe I'm about to upset you with this, that believe there's no expectation you can ever have. It's year one, doesn't matter what happens. We can be the worst defense, no problem. I don't believe that. We are 106th in the nation in total defense. Last year, we were 73rd. One more time. We are 106th in the nation in total defense. Last year, what we considered a terrible year, we were 73rd in the nation in total defense. So far, with the same players, we are doing worse. The same players, including upgrades at spot like middle linebacker, guys like Jason Marshall, who again led the SEC in completion percentage against and quarterback rating against them and throws over 20 yards. I believe that a reasonable expectation, and that's one of the questions going around. Well, what could you reasonably expect from a first year coach with players not for a system? Well, I think reasonable would be returning practically almost the entire D, maybe a little bit of mixture of maybe we're not completely replacing Kyrie Elam, but we are upgrading at linebacker, things like that. I do think with coaching we expect and believe to be better to have the floor for that defense to be at least equal with the previous season. We've seen guys come in to Florida and other places and take units to places they have never been before in year one. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking just be somewhat bad like we saw last year. Don't be 13th in the SEC. We can talk about depth being an issue or talent gaps, but I can tell you we've got more talent than a Mississippi State. We've got more talent probably than this Auburn team has. We have no less than 3 former 5-stars starting on our defense, and Britton Cox, Jason Marshall, and Jervon Dexter. So I know there's talent deficiencies. I'm not arguing that. I'm not arguing that there's not some depth problems. But those were some of the same things last year. I don't think we had great depth last year. I do expect us to at least be able to achieve what we did last year, which I'm not sure if we could call that achievement. At some point, I do think there needs to be some standard. I do think that there needs to be some accountability. If it's players' issue, then let's make some changes to the personnel. I don't think anybody can come in and do too much worse than giving up scores on 7 out of 8 drives, with the 8th drive being because the offense just misfired on the 3rd down play. At this point, like I said after the Tennessee game, I'll say it again, I would go to youth for those positions that we are starting seniors that aren't quite getting the job done. I would rather go through those growing pains now with players that could probably give us the same type of results or just slightly worse. But again, I don't know how that's possible when we see some of this stuff, and get them more reps and get them prepared so next year we can be better. Because if they're not getting all these reps now or getting more reps, then we're going to run into next year where, well, you can't expect these inexperienced guys to play well. Now let's get them that experience so we get rid of the inexperience excuse for next year. Let's show that we're willing to change. We had a problem with Todd Grantham always going with seniority. And I think now's the time that we show, all right, you know what? We're going to build for the future. We're going to make some schematic changes. We're going to do something. Again, I'm not saying this defense needs to be top of the SEC. I'm not saying this defense has to be top 50. I did believe there was potential to be there, whether it's schematic, personnel, combination of both. It's not, but I do think that this defense shouldn't be, and I don't think I've shared this one yet, dead last in the nation in third down conversion percentage. Try as you may about talent, depth, whatever, you can't tell me that we're worse off than Charlotte. You can't tell me that we're worse off than Colorado or Northwestern or any other of these schools from the Fun Belt, from the Pac 12, from the Big 12, where we know they don't play defense, from any of these other All American conference or any lower conference. You can't convince me that Old Dominion should have a better third down conversion percentage than a team that returned like 6, 7, 8 starters. I know it's a new scheme. We've seen plenty of teams not fall to dead last in third down percentage when they've started with a new DC. There's a lot of straw manning out there. And what that is, if you don't know, it's where if there's two opposing sides of an argument, it's where you mischaracterize the argument of the other person to try and make it easier for you to counter. And I'm seeing a lot of this on the Twitter machine. I'm seeing it on the Facebook groups. And I'm sure people are going to want to do it about this podcast. And it goes like this. Well, all these people critiquing or criticizing anything, they must have believed we should have won a national championship this year, or they think we should have won the East this year. No, I'm saying we shouldn't be dead last in the nation in third down percentage against this year. I'm not asking for the top of anything. Don't mischaracterize that. And also, we didn't like hearing in 2020, well, Todd Grantham will be just fine in 2021. Let's look at his 2019 points per game percentage while completely ignoring the fact that he had blanked the worst Vandy team in 15 years and 2 FCS also rans. The reason I have the Billy Napier quote at the beginning of this podcast is the same reason that I'm going to tell you now, and that's because we do need to operate in truth. We do need to be truthful. Are things going to be the best? No, but could they be better? Whether that is switching up personnel, whether that's making adjustments to scheme, yes, and we shouldn't just blanket excuse everything. And that's all I'm saying is if it is a talent issue, let's put the young guys in and let's get them experience so they'll be better prepared for next year when they step into these roles. If it's a scheme issue, let's make adjustments. We can't just keep doing what we're doing. Let's try something. I'd rather try something and fail than not try anything at all. And that's all I'm asking for from this defense at this point. One scary thing is going back to third down percentage. Someone posted a third down percentage that shows your running average for your last 1 game, 3 game, 5 games, etc. And over the last 3 games, our percentage is higher than our percentage for the year. What that tells me, our teams are seeing stuff on tape and they're taking advantage of it. And also, when we look at the competition that we face over the last 3 games, Eastern Washington, Missouri, and LSU, these are not the best offenses that we faced, and they're probably not the best offenses that we're going to face over the final 5 games of the season. So unless we change something, it's going to get easier, and it's getting easier from what the data dictates. That's not me complaining. That's me telling you what the numbers are. Also, another straw man. Well, you're not being patient. You're calling for people to be fired. I'm not calling for anyone to be fired, but I am asking for us to show our coaching acumen and make adjustments. Also, as far as patience, This is where I talk about blind patience, where there's no accountability. There's nothing that can be wrong. If there's anything you think is wrong, you're just impatient. That's not true. There can be things wrong with being 131st in the nation in conversions of third down against. There can be things wrong with being 106th in total defense, just like with Doug Nussmeier in 2017, where I said it was unacceptable to be in the hundreds in offense. I don't change that this year with it being unacceptable to be in the hundreds in defense. As it stands now, I do think Billy Napier overall is doing a great job. One thing I do want to see is improvement from this defense, and it's hard to say whether we've seen that throughout the year or not. I thought we did see some in the Missouri game, but perhaps that Missouri game was in part because it was Missouri. Just like some of the improvement I saw against Eastern Washington, maybe that's in part because it was Eastern Washington. Maybe against those opponents, certain players didn't feel like they had to make hero plays and lose their assignment. Where against LSU, when we're not stopping them, felt like they had to do it, and it led to bigger issues. We will see going forward, but the one thing is we cannot stay the same. We've got to figure something out. I don't believe a guy like Jason Marshall lost his talent. I don't believe a guy like Jaden Hill necessarily lost any talent. We've got the number one linebacker, at least going into this game, from Pro Football Focus. He does have some deficiencies, but there are ways we can coach around that. Unfortunately, some of that utilizes a safety, and those have not played well. Well, if they're not going to play well, get other guys in who will. And if those other guys can't play well, at least they can learn from their mistakes and contribute in the future, as opposed to some guys who will be gone after this year. Understand me that I'm not trying to be negative, but I am trying to tell the truth about where we are and where I think we should be. Again, patience is definitely required. We do need to give the coaches some time, but that also doesn't mean that we leave any sort of expectations at the door. You can have both. It's not an either or. There should not be two sides to this. There should not be a, well, coaches suck, fire them. Shouldn't be that, especially at this point. But you also should not be, well, you can't expect us to be better than Charlotte, the service academies, and UTEP and UTSA in third down percentage or in total defense. It's ridiculous. So stop. If you're one of these hardcore on either side, stop being hardcore on either side. We can simultaneously acknowledge this defense could probably be better while acknowledging, yes, there are still issues and we need to be patient. The good and the bad of it is this performance happened the week of a bye week. Good news is we've got 2 weeks before Georgia, and maybe we'll see some changes. Doesn't mean we're going to necessarily look like a ton of a different team against Georgia, but there are things we can at least see on film, whether there are changes or not, personnel changes. The bad of it is with the bye week, we now have to sit and stew in this game for 2 weeks until we see our Gators play again. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. It always means a lot. Thank you for anyone who shares us on Facebook, gets the word out, or shares us on Twitter, or tells a friend about the podcast. Definitely helps. Thank you, everyone, again for listening. We're going to continue to have good times and bad throughout the season, and I will make sure to be releasing podcasts coming up during the bye week, whether it's later this week or next week. We will have a different type of episode where we'll go through some of mine and my family's history with the Gators. And after that, I would love to hear some of that from you guys about you and your relationship, family's relationship with the Gators, and we'll go from there. So once again, thank you everyone for listening. And as always, go Gators.